Good afternoon. I'm Shannon de Rehove. Welcome to today's webinar hosted on behalf of Sustainability and ESG Africa Conference and Expo. Today's webinar focuses on tackling critical mineral challenges and localizing value chains in Africa. Join our panelists as they discuss the need to strengthen responsible sourcing and governance surrounding the global demand for critical minerals. Before we start, please note that the chat and the Q&A are available to you. Please post your questions in the Q&A and your comments in the chat. Both the Q&A and the chat are at the bottom of your screen. Please be aware that we're recording this webinar and will send the recording to you when it's available. We're also streaming the webinar live on YouTube and we'll share the link in the chat once it's available. Moderating today's webinar is Wendy Poulton. She's the co-founder and a director of the Sustainability and ESG Africa Conference. She's also the director of Strategic Mindsets, a company specializing in strategy and risk consulting and coaching. Wendy will facilitate the discussion with today's panel, which consists of Shane Choshani, the Program Officer and Critical Minerals Lead for South Africa at CNV International, and Khashani Mohale, Senior Industry Specialist for Industry Planning at the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa. I'll hand over now to moderator Wendy Poulton to start the discussion. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Shannon, and welcome to everybody to this, what is, I think, going to be a really interesting conversation about critical minerals. And it's not just the topic itself, but the opportunity that they present for developing countries or many developing countries to have economic growth and also social upliftment. So they're a really interesting topic. And we're very fortunate today to have two really great panelists, very knowledgeable in this field. So I think we're going to start off by asking, and I'll start with you, Shane, what is a critical mineral and how do we actually define what is a critical mineral and what is the context in Africa?
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, colleagues. I'm happy to be here. Critical minerals. Or transitional minerals. So critical minerals is a concept, obviously, which is rooted in a geopolitics of critical minerals. But for Africa and South Africa alone, these minerals, mainly the transition minerals, can definitely contribute to the development of the region, because South Africa and the region can actually develop a lithium-ion battery if we put together our resources and expertise for the development of the region. But critical minerals, as I've indicated, Wendy, it's rooted mainly in geopolitics of minerals, in that which actually come from the EU Critical Raw Material Act, and it's a concept which obviously want to break away from the dependency on Chinese metals. I mean, that is when they came up with the critical mineral law to develop their own minerals and get supply from mainly the countries that have those particular minerals, which Africa and South Africa has, and lots of endowment: manganese, graphite, cobalt, and vanadium, which we have, and rare earth minerals, which are then used in different components, including in the defense sector, in the renewable sector, and e-mobility, and electric cars that are starting to be on our roads. So that is what is mainly termed critical minerals, but that concept in general emanate from the European Union Critical Mineral Act.
Thank you. Kashani.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that. So if we break it down to, what does it mean for us? I think each economy will have a different set of critical minerals for different reasons. So if you're looking at Africa from, the West or the East perspective, it's minerals that are critical to them that we have. And then from our perspective, as I said, each country would be different, but in general, minerals are a significant portion of our economy across the continent. So in a sense, minerals themselves are critical. And of course, the starting point is which ones do you have? So for instance, gold is critical for Mali, right? PGMs are critical for South Africa. So strategically, we need to do put the right blocks in place so that we can get the most out of those minerals. And I think the common factor would be industrialization and supporting our economies.
Thank you. I mean, it's a big strategic advantage, as you've said. And I think a lot of the talk around critical minerals at the moment is in relation to them in the global energy transition. So then we're talking about cobalt, copper, lithium, and we know, for example, that the Democratic Republic of Congo produces 70% or more than 70% of global cobalt output, meaning that it's going to attract a lot of investment as the global energy transition starts gaining momentum. So you started talking about industrialization. Can you give us some more information on that, given that we hold huge reserves of these critical minerals? Shani?
Yeah. So I think we've got to employ a few strategies to industrialize. So things like the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement is one of those, the special economic zones, of course. But I think to be a little bit more specific towards minerals, there's always a couple of key enablers that need to be in place. One would be equity, and in particular, we're talking about risk capital. In many cases, you need to develop it from green fields or even brown fields, but we're talking about years of patient capital for a project that isn't proven yet. It may be a no-go. And then technology or production capability. And then, of course, the one thing that always supports a project, it would be the offtake agreements, So all those three I would put under partnerships, strategic partnerships as a critical enabler. But from our perspective, I mean, I wear a battery value chain.
Shani, sorry, we lost you a little bit there for a couple of seconds.
Okay, apologies. I thought I was booted off. Okay, so from our perspective at IDC, from a strategic development perspective, we look at developing each project or each segment independent of the efforts of building a whole value chain. So in other words, we would even support importing raw materials and exporting processed product or manufactured goods, etc. So the key strategy there is tapping into global value chains. And also, of course, you want to build on what you have. We have minerals across the continent, but in the case of South Africa as well, we have an active market of energy storage. Actually was probably it was one of the biggest in 2023. So it's quite significant, So we're approaching it from both directions to, build the value chain, but we also have to be realistic. It's about building the next step downstream or upstream, not trying to, shoot the lights out and do fancy things.
So what you're saying is that beneficiation of that product that we mine locally is an option, and we could have upstream manufacturing of that. No, it's downstream, right? Downstream manufacturing of say lithium into battery manufacturing. But we could also, you want to industrialize the country, so you could also import some of those minerals if we don't have them in South Africa and still manufacture here in South Africa. or
Well,
in Africa?
I can give you maybe a practical example. So we've just started a project to very early stages to manufacture NMC powder, so nickel, manganese, and cobalt powder. Right? The cobalt has got to come from somewhere else. Right? And that's not going to be a stopper of the project to say we were talking about industrialization. Now we're not using our own cobalt. No, the project is a go ahead. And similarly, there is no downstream local off-taker of NMC powder. So we're looking at exporting. So the partners we're looking for are not necessarily in the country. Yeah, that's just one example.
Yeah. So it's linking into those, as you said, critical mineral value chains around the world and seeing where we can add value within those particular value chains. Okay. Shane, your thoughts on this?
I mean, it boils down to a clear policy directive. I mean, South Africa mostly export its minerals, and this new sector from extractive industry, actually from geoscience to recycling, it requires a clear directive of what a country is going to do, because, for example, recycling is also actually linked to keeping the minerals locally, because that way you also hold on the skills of then re-manufacturing the components. So it requires a clear strategy, a combinations of departments and entities with one vision to ensure that we are able to contribute or also develop our own value chain, or develop or contribute to the value chain rather than actually exporting the minerals. So we have to be clear as a country, because, like, for example, you'll find instances where, for example, the Mineral Council argue that if we have minerals that are directed within the country, it will also, more especially through export taxes, it will threaten the viability of the sector. So we need to have a clear legislation and policy on how we're going to deal with the sector.
Thank you. I think that brings us to the next point, which is what policies do we need in place, not just in South Africa, but across the continent, that are going to help encourage this to occur, taking into consideration that some of them may be nascent industries which have to be started. What is it that we need governments to do to support this? Shane, you want to start?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, we have the African mining vision, which we need to just integrate into our local legislation, because it encourages actually the beneficiation of minerals within the continent without actually having to be the consumers or price takers. Because if you have to manufacture locally, often the difficulty becomes acquiring uh, um, um, minerals at a developmental price, which is a strategy that actually has been employed by China, where it has a price for local consumption and a price for export consumption. So that way, we will be able to develop a develop a value chain if we are able to then take advantage of those minerals without actually starving local companies that want to enter into the sector, which, I mean, an example is been in the steel sector, where steel has been suffering because, unlike in the past, they have to acquire the minerals through like international price.
Mm. No, thanks. And I think you raised a really important point, is that we need integrated policy, right? We need all the different departments of trade and industry and even education for skills and the finance sector all working together to make sure that that policy is going to encourage investment at the end of the day. Kashani, anything you want to add on policy?
Well, just on that point, we need that within countries and between countries, that level of coordination. And the complicating thing is that the market is looking for clarity and certainty. That's the number one thing they look for in policy. So it's a complex thing to navigate. And yeah, I think sometimes we shoot ourselves in the foot. Um, I was going to add something else there. But I mean, ultimately, we need to make the continent investable, and that's what we're trying to achieve here. I
Yeah.
think, and that includes mobilizing local capital and local skills, right? But you got to attract international investment as well.
So that's a question that we got from one of the participants, Jana or Yana, sorry if I've pronounced it incorrectly, is to say, what is the role then? So policy is obviously there to provide that enabling environment and to give incentives for investment. What's the role of investors in the private sector? And we see more and more financial institutions playing really important roles in driving sustainability issues into investments. So what is the role of investors and private sector in making sure that we localize this and also because they can take a multi-country view as well, as you were saying, Kashani, and have sort of regional strategies around some of these critical minerals. Kashani, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's fair to place any expectations of a role on the private sector because we know how they operate, they do what's good for business.
Yes.
And capital is fairly predictable. But I think in these times and in the sectors we're talking about, there's a lot of noise. Unfortunately, even the competition is at a government to government level, let alone company to company or industry to industry. So there's a lot of noise. Maybe it supersedes market dynamics as well. So decision making is difficult. It's complex. So I think the onus is on the facilitators of the investing environment, and then the private sector will do what the private sector does. So we've got to encourage them to do what they do here rather than extracting or build further downstream. So,
Shane, any thoughts on this?
I think in this case it actually requires, I think, certainty from our part as government for the private sector, because a number of issues actually has been raised: the issues of infrastructure, the issues of electricity. I think that is like the other way around. We need to actually ensure that we have all those things in place, so that we can also bargain better to say we do have the necessary infrastructure for you to be able to operate on our shore. As I've indicated earlier on about the critical minerals, we need to be very intentional about what we want to do, the role we want to play in the sector. As I've indicated, that the concept of criticality emanates from the EU. EU has already passed almost 50 projects, of which almost none of them requires manganese.
60.
So what have we done, as a country? And one of their projects is here on rare earth minerals, which is a mineral which is at the center of the geopolitics of critical minerals. So we haven't actually moved into that space, but we need to put together the necessary a policy and certainty for local manufacturing.
Thank you. And I think you raise an important point also about that we have to look at what the market wants and not just what we can do. And having that, so I think that's one of the roles that the private sector can certainly play, is to help advise government about where they think the markets are going to be, where they would potentially invest, so that government gives the right kind of enabling environment. And I think the other really important point you raised there is about other infrastructure, which is going to be required. So it raises the question for me, can we be competitive if we want to localize critical minerals and do beneficiation in Africa? Kashani?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question, maybe billions of dollars question. Again, back to just investability, right? We've got to compete on multiple fronts. But before we talk about the industry specific, this industry is also subject to the issues that we need to solve at a continental level or general level. Things like infrastructure, we've just mentioned, or developing and retaining our talent, which is critical, governance, policy, etc. But I think ultimately we need to compete at a product level as well. We need to compete commercially, technologically, and that Chinese processing machinery, that value chain, that's pretty difficult to beat, And then on the other hand, you're competing against capital in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah, it's not always left up to market dynamics. So I think for us to compete, to give ourselves a fair chance, is really to partner. We compete by working with the two competing hemispheres. And yeah, to do that, maybe we have to stimulate our own local demand. We have to, they say possession is 9/10 of the law. So we own the minerals. How much value can we get out of them besides just maybe a revenue stream or just local processing? But how far downstream can you get? How much technology can you attract, etc. So it's not that simple, but yeah, we can compete, but I think we've got to work with the world rather than against it.
Yeah, that's a really important point, right? And like you said, and work regionally with maybe some of the other SADC countries that also have critical minerals. Shane, any thoughts from you on whether we can be competitive?
I mean, I think we can also compete through leverage. We have minerals. We are sitting on tons and tons, metric tons of manganese. We are the top producer of manganese and platinum. Because the question is, can we compete about those who have already, like the Chinese? No, we can't. We don't have the necessary skills that they have. But we have the minerals, and I mean, we need to, leverage through the minerals to bargain for intellectual property for those manufactured products to be manufactured here next to the source. That is what we need to push for us to be able to compete. But otherwise, if we remain a price taker, it's going to be difficult to compete. I mean, with the East and the West, and we are in a better place to integrate our minerals with those of the region. I think we have the necessary expertise, the necessary geoscience expertise to then assist other African countries for us to be able to compete using our minerals.
No, I think that's really important, the issue around who we partner with. And Kashani, you mentioned, partnerships as well. How do we leverage our BRICS advantage that we have to work with other countries that may, like China and India, that maybe have other resources that we don't? So it becomes back to the geopolitical and the policy environment that government is enabling through its work as well. So what are some of the trade issues that you are seeing also coming through on critical minerals? I mean, Shane, you mentioned that the EU has a policy on it, but they also have a whole lot of other regulations and things which could potentially impact. And Kashani, you mentioned the Africa Free Trade Agreement. Are those enough, what we have in place at an African level? And what are some of the trade barriers that we might be expecting to come out of some of the markets that we want to sell in, like the EU? Shane, you want to start with that?
I mean, on trade, I mean, yes, I'm going to repeat myself there that we remain at a price taker as far as minerals are concerned, and we are a consuming economy. We consume the finished products, so we are definitely not competing on a level basis. So that actually create a problem. I mean, for example, if you look at the auto sector, so we are starting to see lots of cars, the Chinese cars that are coming on our shore, which of course is also threatening the local auto industry, which is providing much needed jobs in the country. So we are really not competing on a level basis, and it might actually create problem for us going into the future.
What about things like
Yeah.
CBAM and
Yeah.
other sort of trade issues that we see associated with climate change? Do you see, I mean, I know it doesn't at the moment cover some of the critical minerals because it's not in the EU emissions trading scheme, but do you see that evolving over time to potentially also cover some of the minerals? I mean, aluminium is already covered and steel. So could it potentially expand, do you think? Shane?
Yes. Yeah, if you look at the CBAM, it at the moment it really doesn't really work for the country because of course everything that we will produce will be taxed because it doesn't actually adhere to the clean air technology. And then anything that then we buy overseas will have actually adhered to that. It will have adhered to the green steel production, which we are not able to do because we don't actually use clean technology to produce those particular minerals. In that way, it will always keep us in the back foot.
Yeah,
Sonny,
and
do you have anything to add there?
I mean, I don't know what's been happening over the last few months. It's almost like you don't even want to comment, you know. But we looked at something like CBAM as a threat, but an opportunity we need to respond to over time, right? And then suddenly, over the last 3 or 4 months, something very similar just came in. And wham! That's it. There's your deal, you know. And we've got to keep responding to those things at an alarming speed, and that's probably one of the challenges we face. You know, besides the need to coordinate regionally, we've got to respond with speed. So when, yeah, no one is out there thinking, how can we help Africa? So we've got to do it ourselves, and in many cases, the horse is bolting, but we don't want to be sitting here grabbing the scraps of what's left. We've got to, you know, determine our own destiny in as far as possible. So I don't think we could ever say it is enough, you know, until we start seeing economic results in the country, then nothing is enough. So we've got to fire from all cylinders. So I go back to working together with industry, but also maybe we need to name some of these challenges or threats, right? Like the CRMA, the European Critical Raw Materials Act. Their objective is by 2030, yeah, they want to produce 10% of their own domestic consumption of critical minerals, but process 40% of it domestically. Right? That's a 30% gap. Where is that 30% going to come from? You know, that must arrive in the European market unprocessed so that they can process it. So it's not going to be Russia, it's not going to be China, it's not going to be North America. Right? So it's going to be the Southern Hemisphere. Australia might give it willingly because they make money from mining, but South America and Africa, yeah, we need it processed here for our own development needs. So there's a conflict right there, you know. So we've got to play that game too. We've got to, I don't know, get into the geopolitics landscape as well, and fight our way through.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you're making, that it's got to be proactive. We've got to be strategic about this and think what some of the ramifications could be with our trade agreements and what stance we take on them. But I want to move on to the issue of skills. So Michelle put a comment or a question in the Q&A about the lack of STEM education in South Africa and in Africa in general. and that we need, if we want to industrialize, we need to have skills that can support that. And I did some recent work on energy skills, and we looked at some of the skills that would be required or that you could use, or transferable skills from the coal mining sector into critical minerals. Although, and there obviously are obvious differences as in terms of mining techniques and things like that, but there are some similarities as well. So looking at that reskilling of the mining side, but when you look at the industrialization side, South Africa's deindustrialized quite a lot over the last couple of decades. And so having quite specialized skills that we might need for manufacturing may be difficult to find. So what should we be doing differently to make sure, and it's always difficult, that as we do this industrialization, we have the skills engine behind that provides us with the competencies that we need? Kashani?
Sorry, I couldn't read Michelle's question and listen at the same time, so I might not answer that directly. But the skills challenge is across all industries, right? It's not specific to critical minerals, or not even to the technical sectors, but in any economy, you need a strong base of talent, and that goes with the STEM subjects. So I'm afraid, I mean, if you look at the case of South Africa, we're not getting it right, and this is a 30-year turnaround. Is it like, if we start getting it right, we're talking about the next generation that might be available for with the appropriate skills. So there are no short-term solutions there. So I think we've got to work with the talent that's available around the world. We've got a visa regime that prevents those skills from coming in, or makes it a bit more difficult. But whenever you have these high-level skills, there's always opportunity to employ more locals and develop them. So that is a tool. But yeah, I don't think it's specific to the sector, and there are no short-term ways to avoid bringing in external skills, because that comes with the technology as well.
Yeah, it's bringing in the external skills, but it's also making sure, as Michelle was saying, that we've got that pipeline coming from basic education, that we have the competencies in our learners that can then be skilled into these new occupations. So
Absolutely.
I think it's a combination.
Maybe back to the first question, that could be another, that could be something that the private sector could do. Upskilling within, like on the job training, or skills development that are appropriate for an industry today. That might be something that the private sector can do better than government.
Yeah, I mean, in the work I've done on skills learning pathways, there's two big sort of gaps. The one is from basic education into some kind of tertiary education or training, and that's the STEM gap, and also the money gap. And then there's another one from basic education or tertiary education into the workplace, and that's definitely where workers or organizations, businesses can help with training and bridging that gap from education into the workplace.
And then there's another one.
We need to fix the STEM one. Yeah, and there's
another chasm, like reskilling within the working environment.
Once you're in the workplace.
Yeah, as your organization or industry transforms, how do you take your people with, instead of just looking for fresh talent all the time?
Absolutely, and that was the work we were doing with the mining sector, was can you reskill the coal miners into other kinds of mining applications so that they don't get left behind, and that you have a pipeline of people that have some skills, and where are there comparable skills that you can, or overlap of skills that you can use. Shane, any comments from you on skills?
Yeah, I mean, the skills actually related to a sector, you know, in the absence of the existing a sector that we play in the within the renewable sector, we will not definitely be able to build the skills because everyone that actually is now being trained in the elected sector is likely to leave the country and go and ply the trade where uh, manufacturing is happening. So we really need to develop a sector. We have uh, the skills, for example, to build the lithium ion batteries. And then once we have a developing and thriving sector, then the necessary skills, I think, will be able to follow. I think one example is the OR Tambo a special development zone, which there is a company there which is going to work on a clean hydrogen, on green hydrogen. So once the sector actually starts, then you will be able to then develop the particular skill because the sector is there. People will be able to work in that particular sector. But in other areas of work, in the absence of the sector in the country, it's going to be difficult to develop the skills, the necessary skills that can actually help the country.
Yeah, that is very true. And in some of the work that we found, if you look at Germany, they've got something like 600 occupations which are registered in Germany. We've got 9,000. So what they do in Germany is they broad base skill people so that they are flexible in the market and they can move between different sectors. And we are sort of narrowing down on some of those things. So one of the recommendations that keeps getting made for industrialization is to go back and look at the curriculum for training and education to broad base it more so that you get that flexibility around movement, and that when a new sector or a new market evolves, you then don't have to start from scratch. You can take from your existing pool of people and redirect them.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's a
absolutely. I
really
mean,
important thing. Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
Go
that
ahead,
is
Shane.
how that is how the mining sector actually was developed in South Africa. I mean, the most of our first universities were fitting the mining sector with skills. We have a template that we can actually also use with the current renewable energy sector.
Mm. And Michelle made a comment that is true, that Germany uses cooperative education system with theoretical and practical contact time. So it's also about, and then we came back to the role of business and industry. It's about helping develop those skills is really, really important. And as you said, Shane, retaining those skills, which is becoming more and more difficult, especially with highly specialized skills like welding and things like that, high temperature welding, that it's just there's a global demand that it's hard to retain people. So thank you for that, Michelle. We had a really interesting question that I'm going to take now, which is a question I'm going to start with you, Kashani. And is it plausible? It's from Shilangu. So it's saying, is it plausible to build a Pan-African framework of coordination where production quotas to maintain price stability and avoid a race to the bottom that negatively impacts all extractors? In other words, how can we replicate the OPEC model of the Middle East oil nations, but with our critical minerals? Interesting question. Kashani.
Wow. Okay, that is above my pay grade, but I think that there's some maybe glaring difficulties with that, right? That we like to speak of critical minerals, but it is, depending on what list you look at, it's 30 to 60 minerals. Each has a market. Each has a different source. Each has different technology to process, etc. So they have very little in common, whereas with oil, you're talking about one product, raw material, and fair enough, it goes into different products. So I really don't know. I think that would be quite difficult to put together. I mean, just to give you an example, like even when we're looking at the battery value chain, we talk about manganese. Okay, great. It ticks many boxes, but the bulk of manganese goes into the steel industry. Same with vanadium. So its dynamics are determined by that rather than the battery value chain, you know. So yeah, I'm afraid yeah, on the spot, I can't think of how we make that happen. You probably need to crowd in other developing regions like South America as well. But and put in the whole bouquet of minerals, say, you know, an African Union led policy and initiative, and maybe the Africa Free Trade Agreement, where everybody is almost everybody is already a signatory. Like, how do we formalize it at that level? And of course, there's a WTO rules that you gotta either comply with or challenge. I don't know. But yeah, that's quite a mammoth one.
It's interesting though, because it sort of leverages that, or they say strength in numbers, right? And how, if it's potentially, and that's what OPEC has used very effectively over the years by being able then to control that market. But like you say, it's a lot of different products in there, which just makes it different.
And the other thing is, you know, in addition to the fragmented bouquet of products, like, we don't have the market. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, we can't exactly bully the world just because we have the minerals.
Yeah. There was a comment from ESG Frontiers who said the same thing. It's we need to determine what value we require or derive from a mineral within the global value chain. We shouldn't be seen to be hoarding a mineral and be unable to fully exploit its utility to us. We need to determine how our national development utility, or NDU, lies. So yeah, if you would like to chat further, please put another question, ESG Frontiers. Shane, have you got any comment on that suggestion about having a Pan-African cooperation agreement on critical minerals?
I mean, that decision can only be taken at the AU level, with every country actually negotiating its own contracts with the manufacturing countries. Is becoming extremely difficult to do so. Lots of countries are entering into trade agreement with the US, with the European Union, with China, Zimbabwe with China on lithium. So it then becomes difficult to have a one direction as a continent. So that decision can only be taken at the EU. But then the question is whether that will be possible with the current AU administration.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, yeah, that's got to happen at a policy level or government level, but even at a project level as well. You know, before you can raise capital, you start signing away offtake just to secure the project, to secure the development, you know? And invariably that goes off our shores, which is a serious problem.
No, thank you. I want to move on. We've got about 15 minutes left. So I wanted in the last section to talk about the environmental issues in related to critical minerals. We've spoken, and I've seen some figures associated with green hydrogen, that if we recycle and we use new technologies that use less of the critical mineral, we can save and extend the life of those limited resources much longer. But on the other hand, we have a lot of environmental issues with heavy metals and a fear that developing countries will get this waste dumped on them and then be doing recycling initiatives and having environmental damage in their countries. And then we also have the issue around the circular economy, and are we doing enough in the manufacturing side of things to integrate circular economy principles and make sure that the materials that we're using are more easily recyclable, and what does that do to value chains? So any thoughts from you, Shane? I'll start with you about the environmental issues, recycling, what that means for critical minerals, and what role Africa could play in that.
Well, I mean, by nature, mining actually do generate lots of pollution because remember, it uses chemicals. Yeah, it's extractive industry. You have to dig and refine minerals using water, which often then has to be stored in tailings. And if those tailings are not being maintained, they often actually leak into streams and water, and more especially with the critical minerals, for example, the rare earth minerals, which has been proven to also contaminate the fresh underwater. Then and the expansion, because the mines are going to expand. So for us to be able to reach the net zero, we require lots and lots of metals. And those metals are in Africa, they are in South Africa. It simply means the mines are going to expand, the people are likely to be also relocated or dispossessed of their land. And these issues really need to be at the center of policy development on how to alleviate this kind of suffering for people, because sometimes we focus on the economy, on the development of the sector without actually taking those into consideration. And then with the current legislation where we have seen non-compliance with the SLPs and other social issues and environment in our current mines, we really need to re-look at how we are doing our mining. Otherwise, we are really going to create unnecessary harm to people, because the mines are definitely going to expand. And as I've indicated earlier on, if we look, the circular economy is linked to current mining. So because metals, the recycling of metal is different from that of paper. It's mining on its own, which once then we export lots of this mineral outside, we are also losing the capacity to enter into circular economy, because then we no longer actually determine the downstream, the upstream of these minerals. So we will then find ourselves where we really need to export most of these minerals to the countries that have the capacity to recycle. Like I've indicated, that the sector skills depend on the sector actually being developed in the country. So on the issue of minerals, we really need to come up with new ways to regulate the sector, because the current system really doesn't really work. If you go into communities that are mining platinum, are mining manganese, because more and more companies are entering the sector and there is lots of non-compliance.
No, thank
Yeah,
you.
but
Kashani,
quick.
yeah, so I just wanted to just give a statistic here, because you were talking about batteries earlier, is that in some work that's done by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who are experts on the circular economy, they are saying that it's actually demand for critical minerals is projected to exceed supply by 2035, which is 10 years from now, across a whole range of different materials. And so they're saying that obviously because of that, you're going to have to look a lot at recycling and the circular economy. And in batteries, they're saying that the market's going to grow by 20-fold to 95 billion US dollars by 2035. So that's for recycling, the battery recycling market. So huge potential there as well. What are your thoughts on this, Kasani? And is IDC doing work around this part, or just the upstream part around mining and localization?
No, we're firing from all cylinders. We're not very active yet in terms of on the recycling end of the value chain. But if you look at the end of life product that we're producing now, it's enough to cause a problem that needs a solution, but it's small in terms of scale and developing businesses around it and infrastructure, etc. So I think It's going to take some entrepreneurial creativity there to solve for this problem. I mean, we're already doing it at a small scale here and there, but yeah, we're competing against other nations. The technology keeps evolving quite fast. Shane mentioned the projects approved by the EU. By the way, that number has gone up to 60 recently, and a lot of those are recycling projects. So yeah, we've got to, I don't know, compete at that level as well. And the difficult thing is you got to be either close to a market, as in the source of the spent material, or close to a manufacturing hub. So yeah, it's not gonna be an easy one, but luckily, the product will look after itself. What we're trying to avoid is it leaving unprocessed off our shores. It will be processed, but we want that to happen here.
On that note, we had a question from ESG Frontiers to say, I think it was directed to you, Kasani, to say that, is it correct to say we have no market for beneficiated products in South Africa? The question is based on the comment that we have no market, yet we have a thriving automotive value chain and behind the meter demand. Are you saying there's no market, or there just isn't a big enough market?
No. If we're talking about recycling, I'm saying maybe the challenge is that the value chain isn't joined, right?
Okay.
So if you recycle the product, you've got to be able to put it back into production somewhere, right? And it's already refined. You just need to separate it a bit. So it's got to go almost straight into component manufacturing. So if we're not manufacturing components locally, but we're producing chemicals, and yes, we're using the product, where does it fit in the local value chain? So invariably, it ends up getting exported, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like we need to be realistic about what we're targeting, and in each case, it is the next step up or down the value chain, right? So with recycling, of course, the logistics have got to work for themselves, collect the product, deactivate it, etc. But once you process it and we establish that technology and make it competitive and efficient, in all likelihood, it will be exported to a processing hub, right? But once we develop our own processing facilities, like maybe the NMC powder can absorb some of that, our project, or maybe somebody else is working on something similar, then at that point, then you have a market for your processed recycled material. Yeah, as I say, we've got to fire from all cylinders so that each of these opportunities in their time can feed into the next one. And it's not linear. It's not it's not connected linearly. So I think firing from all cylinders is the right. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's got to be a business case for every part of that investment cycle. Yeah. Thank you. I hope that answers your question. Shane, anything else from you on the circular economy side, or anything to do with some of the, I think I mentioned in the beginning, the trade-offs between data centers that would use lots of energy and lots of minerals, critical minerals for battery storage and things like that. Is the EU doing anything in that space that we can learn from or that we should be aware of?
I mean, it boils down to completing the cycle. I think Hashan put it much more better. Because remember, I mean, a circular economy it's a secondary mining. You're trying to salvage as much as possible the minerals that are in those components, which might be obviously copper, it would be the permanent magnets from rare earth minerals to remanufacture again. But without a manufacturing sector in the country, then it becomes difficult to produce them for local sector, because you then have to send. In fact, we are the circular economy that we will be actually entering into is to separate those minerals and then sell them into different countries. The countries that need the neodymium, we will have to send them there. The countries that need copper, we will need to send that copper to that particular country. Yeah, that is the sector that we will enter of actually stripping and selling, which is also related to the current scrap industry in South Africa, in which we are sending everything to the Rotterdam Dam. Without that sector existing in the country, it's going to be difficult to fully implement the circular economy in the country.
Yeah.
Can I go back to that question, please?
Yes, of course.
Mandy, sorry, I just read it again a little bit clearer. ESG frontiers. So, yeah, I wasn't saying we don't have a market, but all of this is relative, right? Like, for instance, let's look at manganese, right? We produce about 40% of the world's manganese, but realistically, we only consume about 1% of it. Right? So there's a huge mismatch there. Our market does not support beneficiation of manganese. It's got to slot into the global market for that. And of course, beneficiate it as far downstream as you can. But if you can get whatever, let's say 15% of battery grade manganese, that still has got to be supplied to the world. South Africa will not consume that. So all I'm saying is that our market at the application level and relative to the scale of what we want to achieve in terms of minerals processing, it's not quite significant. So the markets are in the Northern Hemisphere, and we've got to play to that market.
Thank you. Just some of the other issues that come up with circularity and critical minerals is that many people, including the World Economic Forum and others, talk about extending the life of things. So wind turbines, for example, instead of breaking them down and repurposing them, they're talking about remanufacturing them or life-exing them to further extend product life cycles, which is not so good if you're a supplier of critical minerals, but we're going to run out of resources fairly soon anyway. And they think that a life of a wind turbine can be prolonged for up to 20 years if it's remanufactured. So it's thinking about those kinds of things, which I think are really important, and how we would fit into those value chains as well. And this concept of designing for durability rather than for quick turnover and consumer and making lots of profit. And using them in less toxic ways that allows for the safe extraction, which is actually new materials that we would use that would allow safe extraction. But it's a really complex issue, and I think it's something that we're going to have to address over time, but it's something that's really important to integrate into policy. Do either of the panelists have any views around how circularity has been integrated into policy? I mean, Shane, you mentioned a bit about the EU, but I know the UK has put out a circular critical mineral strategy where they promote the circular economy in that. Do we know of any other countries or any other measures that have been taken within Africa to promote circularity? Shane or Kasani, either of you? Shane?
I mean, it's like with any other strategy on critical minerals. We are on a talking stage. We haven't actually implemented anything. It's something that we believe can be done. We haven't actually even done feasibility studies on that. Like I've indicated that the circular economy is directly linked to extractive industry. If you export the minerals, you are also actually reducing your capacity to play a role in the circular economy. I mean, whether we like it or not, the Chinese have completed that cycle. That is why they have a quasi-monopoly on the renewable energy, accounting to almost 80-90% of the critical minerals, because they have started earlier to develop skills and necessary skills in the sector. That is why they also have the capacity to recycle the minerals and then redo the components once again. So without really the existing sector, it's going to be difficult for us to play any meaningful role in the circular economy. And for that, like I've indicated, the current components, the solar panels, the wind turbines that we will have to just strip them and send specific minerals that we salvage in into different countries that manufacture those components.
Thank
The
you.
other
And
unfortunate thing is that,
yes, sorry,
quick, a big part of that circular economy starts in the design of the product.
Yes.
Designing it for circularity, and we're not in that space either.
Yeah, it's the materials, the new materials that you would need, and the design, absolutely. So there's an interesting comment in closing of this topic from Michelle, who says, if you look locally, Revolve recycles end-of-life automotive lithium-ion batteries into lithium pH stationary products where size and energy density is not an issue. It's unlikely that Africa will be able to be at the forefront of new technologies. However, we can very well take over existing technologies, which I think is what you were saying, Shane, which in densely populated countries are at life end. China acquired automotive skills by purchasing old production lines and producing for their local market until they reached a skill level where they could start competing on new products. And then we also had a comment from Janiko, who said the SADC has a circular economy strategy, which is working on an implementation plan. And yeah, so interesting topic, and it sounds like there's a lot of different issues on it, but it's for Africa, it looks like we have to move slowly in that direction, and as you said, Shane, and get experience with certain things and then move into circularity. Okay, so that brings us to the end of what has been a very useful hour. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Shane and Kashani, thank you so much. You made my job very easy. And
thank you too.
Hopefully to the audience, you have learned something about circularity. What I'm taking away from this is we need to integrate, we need systemic thinking on this, on policy and on many other issues. And we need to have a proper strategy that is thought through all the different dimensions and starts us working in the right direction towards a longer term benefit for the country. But it's not something that we can immediately start jumping into and getting a lot of economic benefit from right now. But we certainly have a lot of opportunity in this area that we need to explore further. So thank you so much. And with that, I'll hand back to Shannon.
Quick, sorry, just a thank you from my side. The audience was quite informative as well. So thank you very much. We all learn as we go along. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to all of you. We thank you so much for joining us today. Before we wrap up, I'd like to extend my gratitude to our moderator, Wendy Poulton, and our guest speakers, Shane Choshani and Khashani Mohali, for an informative webinar. The next Sustainability and ESG Africa Conference webinar will take place on the 11th of September 2025 at 3 p.m. and will focus on the power of public-private partnerships in Africa's sustainable development. The link to register for that event was shared in the chat. If you have any further questions or would like to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to us via email at shannon@creamermedia.co.za. And if you're interested in hearing more about the Sustainability and the ESG Africa Conference, please visit the website at www.esgafricaconference.com. And with that, I'd like to bid you all farewell. Thank you very much for your time, and goodbye.